March 15, 1623. Dawn hasn't touched the skyline of Istanbul yet. Inside the walls of Topkapi Palace, behind doors carved from Lebanese cedar and reinforced with iron bands forged in Damascus, someone is screaming. Not the scream of childbirth, not the scream of grief. This is something else entirely. This is the sound of a human mind shattering in real time. The palace guards stationed outside, men who have stood watch over dying soldiers, who have witnessed public executions, who have heard every conceivable variety of human suffering, these hardened warriors take 3 deliberate steps backward from that door. One of them will later write in his private journal, recovered centuries afterward from a family estate in Anatolia, "I have heard men die on the battlefield. I have never heard anything like what I heard that night. It was the sound of a soul trying to escape a body that had become a prison." The girl screaming, 15 years old. Her name is Fatma Sultan, daughter of the most powerful man in the known world, granddaughter of the woman who would rule an empire from behind latticed windows. Just 3 months ago, she was writing treatises on astronomy, debating scholars in multiple languages, asking questions about planetary motion that wouldn't be formally answered for years. Tonight, she is learning what it truly means to be Kursi in her father's empire. This isn't a story about a wedding night. This is a story about a machine, one designed with surgical precision to turn human beings into instruments of state policy. What you're about to hear has been buried in encrypted archives for 600 years, and the question we should be asking is why they hid it. The question is how many other truths are still buried, waiting to surface. The Ottoman Empire at its height wasn't just powerful. It was the gravitational center of 3 continents. When Istanbul spoke, Venice listened. When the Sultan frowned, kings in Vienna lost sleep. And inside this empire, within the marble heart of Topkapi Palace, there existed a section called the Imperial Harem. You've heard of it. You think you know what it was. You don't. This was a parallel government, a shadow state where the Sultan's mother, his wives, his daughters, and hundreds of enslaved women lived in a hierarchy more intricate than any European court. Some of these women wielded more actual power than most male ministers. But here's what history books won't tell you. That power had rules, and for the Sultan's daughters, those rules were written in their own flesh. Fatma Sultan was born in 1606 to Sultan Ahmed I and Kaiksem Sultan, a woman who became one of the most formidable rulers in Ottoman history, though no textbook calls her that. Kaiksem ruled from the shadows for nearly 40 years. She made sultans. She unmade them too. But even Kaiksem, with all her accumulated power and political brilliance, couldn't protect her daughter from the machine. By age 10, Fatma spoke 4 languages fluently. She could debate scholars in Persian, write poetry in Arabic that made court poets nervous, discuss Greek philosophy in the original text. Palace astronomers recorded that she asked questions about celestial mechanics that demonstrated an understanding far beyond her years. She kept journals, dozens of them, filled with observations about lunar phases, sketches of architectural innovations, philosophical questions about the nature of time itself. One entry, dated December 1620, reads, "If the stars move in perfect circles, why does time feel like a spiral? Father says I think too much for a girl. Mother says nothing, but her eyes tell me she knows something I don't. I wish the stars could warn me of what's coming. They couldn't." December 1622. Fatma is summoned to the innermost chamber of the harem with no warning, no explanation. Her mother is there. Kaiksem Sultan, the woman who had orchestrated political coups, who had survived assassination attempts, who had outlived enemies with the patience of stone slowly wearing down water, sits with her back perfectly straight, face completely unreadable. The announcement is made by a woman named Gulnar Hatton, whose job title doesn't translate cleanly into English. She was what we might call an architect of psychological destruction, and she had been perfecting her craft for 30 years. The words are simple and devastating. The decision has been made. You will marry Kara Mustafa Pasha, The wedding will be March 15th. Preparations begin tomorrow. Kara Mustafa Pasha, a military commander 20 years Fatma's senior. A man whose face carried scars from 3 different campaigns. A man who had built his reputation on efficiency, on breaking things quickly and completely. For him, this marriage was a promotion, a reward for unwavering loyalty to the Sultan. For Fatma, it was a death sentence dressed in silk and gold. She doesn't speak. She looks at her mother, searching for something, anything, in those eyes that have watched empires shift. Qasem's face remains stone. That silence is its own answer. And in that moment, Fatma understands that even her mother's legendary power has limits. What happened next wasn't preparation for marriage. It was erasure by design, and the methods they employed would make modern psychologists recoil in horror. Because here's the worst part about this story. It's not that it happened. It's that someone, multiple someones, worked extraordinarily hard to make sure you never heard about it. Every encrypted document, every sealed archive, every conveniently lost record. These weren't accidents, they were calculated erasures. And what we're about to explore is what those erasures tried to hide. The room they take Fatma to is called the Gelin Odasi, the bride's chamber. The name is a lie. It isn't a chamber designed for preparation. It's a laboratory for breaking human will. Every single detail has been calculated over generations of refinement. The walls are paneled in dark ebony, chosen specifically because it absorbs light, making the space feel like it's closing in on itself. The carpets are so thick that footsteps make no sound, creating an environment where even your own movements feel muffled and unreal. The windows aren't covered with curtains. They're sealed with heavy wooden shutters nailed permanently shut. The only light comes from oil lamps positioned at specific angles. Modern psychologists who have studied the surviving architectural plans say the lighting was deliberately designed to create disorientation, bright enough to see, but positioned so you could never quite tell what time it was, how much time had passed, whether it was day or night outside those sealed walls. On the walls hang tapestries, but these aren't decorative. Each one depicts stories from Islamic history showcasing the ideal wife. Women who sacrifice everything without question. Women who obeyed without hesitation. Women who found joy only in their husband's approval. Visual propaganda running on a loop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, slowly rewiring what you believe about yourself and your purpose. And into this calculated space walks Gulnur Hatun like a headmistress at an execution. 60 years old, a face that looks carved from Cappadocian stone. In her hands, she carries a leather-bound book written in Ottoman script. This book has no title on the cover. Inside are detailed instructions for breaking a human being's autonomous will while keeping the body intact. It had been refined over 8 decades of use. Fatma was the 18th princess to go through this particular version of the process. But what happened next would haunt the palace guards for the rest of their lives. Stand, Gulnur commands, and for the next 4 hours, Fatma learns what they call the 18 postures of humility. These aren't simple bows or polite gestures. Each one has specific angles, specific meanings, specific messages encoded in body language that had been systematized like mathematics. The greeting bow requires a 30-degree neck tilt, hands positioned below the heart, eyes cast downward. The message it sends is clear: I am grateful for your attention. The serving bow demands a 45-degree angle, hands extended with palms up, communicating, I exist to fulfill your needs. And then there's the retiring bow. Full prostration, forehead pressed to the ground. The message, I disappear when you wish it. For hours a day, every single day, for 3 solid months. Modern kinesiologists who have studied the documented postures say they were designed to create what is called embodied submission. It's a process where your body's muscle memory eventually overrides conscious resistance. Your mind might desperately want to stand tall, but your trained muscles betray you, pulling you automatically into submission before thought can intervene. By week 3, Fatma's body bows before her mind can decide to resist. That was always the point. Then they came for her voice. 43 words. That's what Fatma's entire vocabulary was systematically reduced to over the following weeks. Not 43 types of words, 43 specific phrases written out on parchment that she was permitted to speak. Yes, my lord, as you wish. Forgive my inadequacy. Thank you for your mercy. I am honored by your attention. 43 different ways to disappear while still making sound. Any deviation, any attempt to speak outside this approved list, brought immediate consequences. The first violation meant forced fasting for 24 hours. The second violation meant the reflection cell, a space barely large enough to sit in, pitch black, for 6 hours of isolation. By week 5, Fatma stopped trying to speak anything else. The girl, who once debated scholars in 4 languages, could no longer form a complete independent sentence. Twice each week, there was a ceremony they called the lesson in perspective, and here's what that actually meant. Fatma, daughter of the Sultan, granddaughter of the most powerful woman in the empire, was required to personally serve her father's favorite concubines, not symbolically, actually serve them with her own hands. She washed them, she combed their hair, she dressed them in the garments they would wear for their intimate appointments with her father. She fed them by hand like a servant feeding nobility. One witness account from a junior attendant who later left the palace and wrote privately about what she witnessed describes it this way. The princess shook so violently while fastening a ruby necklace that the stones rattled like dice in a cup. She wept without making any sound. I have never seen a human being cry while producing no noise whatsoever. It was like watching a ghost try to mourn its own death. This wasn't random cruelty designed to amuse sadistic supervisors. This was systematic psychological warfare engineered to accomplish one specific goal: destroy the princess's sense of rank, worth, and identity at the deepest possible level. Make her understand in her bones, in her cellular memory, that even enslaved women who share her father's bed have more value, more status, more purpose than she does. By week 8, Fatma's hands no longer shook when she dressed the concubines. Not because she had found peace with it, not because she had accepted her role, but because part of her had simply stopped being present. The person performing those actions was increasingly someone else, and the girl who loved stars was retreating somewhere deep inside where the pain couldn't quite reach. Beneath the harem, in rooms that didn't appear on any official palace maps, they had constructed something truly disturbing: replicas, exact replicas of bridal chambers. And within these rooms stood mannequins, but these weren't simple dress forms. These had been commissioned from Venetian craftsmen who specialized in creating anatomical models for medical schools. They were detailed in ways that turn the stomach when you understand their purpose. And Fatma, 15 years old, mind already fracturing from 3 months of systematic abuse, was brought to these underground rooms twice a week. Under the supervision of elderly women who took notes in Persian, she was required to rehearse, to practice scenarios no child should know exist. Every reaction was documented with clinical precision. Subject displayed fear response. Session extended. Subject exhibited tears. Additional conditioning required. Subject showed physical resistance. Increased sessions ordered. They were building a manual, a technical guide for ensuring the wedding night proceeded according to plan. One of these manuals was discovered in 2019 in the Topcopy archives, and the historian who found it said she had to leave the reading room twice to compose herself. It's written like a medical textbook, clinical and detailed and horrifying in its bureaucratic precision. The psychologist who later reviewed the document said it reads remarkably similar to certain CIA psychological operations manuals from the 1950s. Except this particular guide was written in 1623, 7 days before the wedding. Fatma was moved to an isolated pavilion in the palace gardens known as the Gelenkekskoe. No one could enter or leave without explicit authorization. No sound from the outside world could penetrate those walls. Her diet became regulated down to the ounce, not for health or nutrition, but for mood control. Pomegranates, honey, almonds, goat's milk. Exotic spices imported from Yemen at enormous expense. Modern chemical analysis of similar historical recipes suggests these particular spices contained compounds we now recognize as mild sedatives, substances that induce dreamlike states of compliance, natural anxiolytics that reduce the capacity for resistance. She bathed twice daily in waters infused with valerian root, poppy extract, and orange blossom, not for cleanliness, for chemical sedation. The walls of the pavilion were covered entirely in mirrors made from expensive Venetian glass, positioned with strategic care. Everywhere Fatma looked, she saw herself watching herself, judging herself, policing herself. It's a technique certain Sufi mystics called muraqaba, self-observation meant to facilitate spiritual growth. Here it had been weaponized, turning the victim into her own guard, her own prison warden. On the final night before the wedding, they gave her a specialty. The recipe was recovered from palace medical records sealed for centuries. It contained concentrated poppy milk, crushed mandrake root, and a third substance historians believe was an early form of dissociative compound. The goal wasn't simply sleep, the goal was separation, mind from body. Present in flesh, but absent in spirit, as she drank it, sitting alone in that pavilion surrounded by mirrors showing infinite fractured reflections of herself, Fatma managed to write one final journal entry. Her last coherent thought as herself reads, "Tonight the stars will still move in their perfect circles. Tomorrow they will still be there, but I won't be able to see them anymore, not really. The girl who loved stars is about to become someone else, someone I don't recognize or know. Mother says this is what it means to be a woman of power. If this is power, I would rather be a nameless slave with a soul still intact." Then the chemical fog rolled in, and the girl who loved stars ceased to exist. When dawn broke over Istanbul on March 15, 1623, the city exploded in celebration. But in a private chamber, physicians documented what they clinically termed complete physical and psychological collapse. Their encrypted notes, written in Persian and sealed for over 600 years, describe what modern psychologists recognize immediately as dissociative shutdown. It's what the human mind does when trauma becomes so catastrophically overwhelming that consciousness itself transforms into the enemy. The mind abandons the body entirely, leaving it to function on autopilot while awareness retreats to some unreachable interior space. The final medical note, written near dawn, states, "What we observed tonight was not a wedding night. It was what we term ruvkuk, the departure of the soul. Consummation achieved, marriage sealed, physical body remains functional." The person who entered this chamber, however, did not survive the night. When morning came, Istanbul celebrated a successful royal wedding. Coins were thrown to cheering crowds, blessings were recited in mosques across the city. Poetry was commissioned praising the glorious union, and in that pavilion, Fatma sat in out silence, staring at nothing. The girl had died. Not her body, that would linger for 29 more years, producing children, attending ceremonies, performing her role with mechanical precision. But everything that made her Fatma, everything that asked questions about stars and time and the nature of existence, was gone. The machine had worked exactly as designed. Fatma Sultan lived until 1652. Court records show she was present at numerous state functions. She bore children, she fulfilled every obligation expected of her. But there are no more journal entries after March 15, 1623. Not a single one. No more questions about astronomy. No more philosophical observations. No more poetry. Just silence that stretched across 3 decades until her death at age 46. And here's what should terrify us most. Fatma wasn't unique. She wasn't an exception. She was one princess among dozens who went through variations of this same systematic process. The machine didn't break. It kept running for generations, turning brilliant young women into instruments of state policy through methods so psychologically sophisticated they wouldn't be formally studied or named for another 300 years. Asterisk call to comment asterisk what haunts me most about Fatma's story is just what happened to her. It's how efficiently it was buried, how carefully it was erased, and it makes me wonder how many other voices are still sealed in archives, waiting for someone to care enough to listen. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think we owe to these silenced voices, because I believe forgetting them is how we allow history to repeat itself. The girl who loved stars died on her wedding night in 1623, but tonight, for the first time in 600 years, we remembered her name, and maybe that matters more than we know.